Hello, today I'm going to help you choose the right camera to use in your macro photography. So let's get into it. Hello and welcome to my channel on macro photography. If this is your first time here and you enjoy learning all about macro photography, from different cameras and lenses to how to approach subjects and shoot that image, then click that subscribe button, ring that bell so you don't miss a single episode. So welcome to a first of a series of videos on specialized subjects when it comes to macro photography. What I like to call macro basics, all the things you want to consider when doing your macro work. I did a video a little while ago, linked right here, that suggests that you do not need expensive gear to do macro work. And this is very, very true. You can use a point and shoot camera. You can use your cell phone to do macro photography. However, most of these devices generally don't do true macro work. The little flower icon you see on a point and shoot image is really for close-up. It's not true macro. So what is true macro? Macro is one-to-one life-size representation of your subject that you're shooting. So an insect that might be 5 millimeters in size takes up 5 millimeters on your camera sensor. In close-up photography, that relation goes away. Stuart Wood did a fantastic video on how to judge magnification in your macro photography, and that video is linked right here. Check it out. It's really worthwhile. At some point, you're going to want to trade in that point and shoot camera and get a proper digital camera with a dedicated macro lens. So the choice comes down to several different things. In cruising the macro forums on Facebook that I'm a part of, the question often comes up, what camera is best for macro photography? The answer really has less to do with the camera and more to do with the user using the camera. How well you know your camera, how well you can adjust settings and take into account subtle changes in lighting, in movement of your subject if you happen to have something that moves. All these things, how well you understand things like depth of field. All of these subjects are going to be broached in this series of videos. For today, I want to just cover choosing a good camera to use. A lot of people think a particular brand is better than one or the other. Really, that's not the case. It's knowledge of your camera. If you don't already have a digital camera or mirrorless camera, then that choice becomes a little bit difficult and can be very daunting. My suggestion to you is do not get overwhelmed by buzzwords and marketing hype that you might hear, particularly if you're very new to photography and you don't necessarily understand all the terms like
45 megapixels, 4K video.
All these things that you hear in the marketing hype. Cut through all that. Here are the things you really need to consider when purchasing a camera to use for macro work. One, what is your actual purpose? Are you doing your macro photography as just a hobby, something you enjoy, something good for your own mental health? Personally, that's one of the reasons I do a lot of it, is it helps keep me calm. It keeps my creativity going. And I really enjoy doing things in nature for nature macro work and setting up studio stuff for studio macro work. That gives me a great sense of personal satisfaction. Other things to consider are you going to print your images? And if so, how big? Even as a hobbyist macro photographer, I actually encourage people to print your images for your own viewing. It's a great way to judge the quality of your work, to see how you improve. People coming into your home will also admire your work. It's a good way to do a little bit of self-promotion and get some more satisfaction. Are you going to sell those printed images? This might have a bearing on the size you print and therefore the resolution that you use in your camera. When it comes to resolution, even for most prints, you don't need anything greater than about 20 megapixels. So a low-end digital camera that has a resolution of 12 to 20 megapixels is more than enough for most people. Unless you plan on printing an image the size of a billboard, you don't need a camera that can do 45 megapixels. Not to mention the computer and processing power you're going to need to work on that image after the fact, and hard drive space. All of these things you have to consider. Do you want to record video? Some macro photographers like recording macro video as well. That will have a bearing on which camera you choose, because you're going to want to get a camera that has decent video capability. A lot of the newer cameras coming out, particularly in the mirrorless arena, can do 4K video. Personally, for me, that's too much, and I'm also not a videographer. The new Canon R5, which is going to be out this summer, is rumored to do 8K video. Again, for me, that is way too much. Don't really need that. And that's my personal choice. But it does have a bearing on what camera you choose. The bottom line comes down to, do you want to do a digital SLR or do you want to do a mirrorless? The big difference between these two is obviously the mirrorless has no mirror. This has a lot of distinct benefits. One, there is no vibration from the mirror slapping up and down to expose your image. If you're doing macro images of things that are really tiny, have minute hairs, then sometimes that mirror, when it flips up and back, is enough to do a bit of movement in the camera, which will be enough to blur the detail you're trying to get in your macro image. Solution to that is to use mirror lockup on a digital SLR. But on a mirrorless, you don't need that. So there's no vibration there whatsoever, which gives you a more stable image. Again, some of the new mirrorless cameras coming out actually have in-body image stabilization, or IBIS, if you want some technological terms. So combined with image stabilization on the lens, optical image stabilization, you can get some pretty good quality, stable images. When it comes to brands, you want to look at probably the number of lenses available for each of those brands. I personally shoot Canon. The reason I chose Canon is when I was learning photography way back when, the person teaching me had a Canon camera. It made it easy for him to hand me a lens and to try different things. If you have a camera club in your area, you might want to talk to other members of the club, see what they use, because it is easier to get help from someone who uses a similar camera to you than it is if all your friends use Canon or Nikon and you've got a Pentax. A lot of things will translate easily because all the concepts are the same, but it's much more difficult to tell, to help you say, rotate this button, choose this menu item, because they're going to be different. So you might want to choose a camera based on your local popularity and ability to get assistance. My next camera, I think, will probably be one of the Canon EOS mirrorless cameras. It's up for debate between the rumored R6 and the RP. The RP has a little bit more in terms of resolution, but again, it's not a critical factor. The new R6 has some additional features, rumored. For example, dual card slots. That's kind of cool and really good if you're out in the field for a long time doing macro and you're there for 5 hours doing several thousand images. You don't have to switch cards quite so easily or so quickly. Final thing to consider, of course, is budget. If you don't already have a digital camera, either a DSLR or mirrorless, that you can put a dedicated macro lens on, then budget is one thing you definitely want to consider. Again, you don't need a super high end of the line camera. A lot of the entry-level cameras are more than enough to give you good quality macro images. Again, part of that might depend on what your purpose is. If you're wanting to print a lot of images, particularly if you want to print larger images, then you might want to step up to a more intermediate camera. But really, you don't need the high-end, very expensive cameras at all. I think the bottom line to consider or to think about is it's not the brand of camera, it's the user of the camera and how well you know it. So grab a camera that you feel that you can learn comfortably and quickly, learn how to use it really well, and watch these next series of videos. In them, I'm going to cover how to learn about your camera. I'm going to cover exposure, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, depth of field, and much more in this whole series of videos. Tell me about the camera you use if you have one already, and why you chose it. What makes you like that camera? I'm really curious to know. If you want to learn more, please remember to click that subscribe button, like, share, comment on this video, and remember to check out the playlist on beginner macro photography. Until next time, remember that in the macro world, we make little things a big deal.